All right, let's dive into a word you think you know, gods. But what if I told you its ancient meaning had less to do with deities and way more to do with power, judges, and maybe even your wallet? We're about to find out.
So let's start with this. It's a line from the New Testament that's a real head scratcher. In a text that's all about one God, the writer just casually mentions God's many. I mean, it sounds like a total contradiction, right? What on earth could he have been talking about?
And that brings us to the big question our source material asks. What if we've been looking at this all wrong? What if the word gods in a lot of these ancient texts wasn't pointing up to the heavens, but was actually pointing to some very powerful people right here on Earth? Okay, so to crack this puzzle open, we have to do something kind of tough. We have to set aside our modern ideas and go back to the original languages. Because according to the source material we're looking at, the secret isn't really about theology. It's all in the translation. The first key is this Hebrew word, Elohim. Now, sure, it's often translated as God, but here's the kicker. The source points out that it's also defined as rulers and judges. You can even see in some parts of the Old Testament where Elohim is translated specifically as the judges, handling legal disputes. So get this, men with the power to judge were literally called Elohim.
And this idea doesn't just stop in the Old Testament, it carries right on into the New. The Greek word is theos. And, you guessed it, the source shows that just like Elohim, theos could also just mean a magistrate. It was a formal title for a judge in the Roman, Greek, or Hebrew courts of that time. So when you hear God's many, it might just be talking about all those human judges. So let's just pause on that for a second. The crucial takeaway here is that gods was often a job title. It was a term for a man or a group of men who had the authority to rule, to judge, and to basically decide right and wrong for everyone else. This one little linguistic shift, well, it changes how you might read a lot of these old texts.
Okay, so now that we've got this new lens, let's see what happens when we apply it to history. Because if gods are rulers, then suddenly things we think of as worship might actually be something else entirely.
Let's talk about the golden calf. You know the story, right? We usually think of it as just this huge religious mistake. But the source we're examining suggests it was actually something far more, well, practical and political. The argument is that the calf was in essence a physical bank, a treasury. By melting down all their gold and putting it in one central spot, it became a kind of economic glue. Nobody could just pack up and leave without losing everything they owned. It created loyalty through financial control, a shared wallet that kept the whole group together. And this idea of a central power providing for its people, it wasn't some one-off thing. In ancient Sumer, they had the goddess Nansha, who was basically the personification of the state's social security. And we all know about Rome, where the emperors gave out free bread from government temples. In both cases, you have a social safety net tied to a divine authority, which creates a kind of dependency that keeps the rulers in power. Now, this is where the analysis takes a really provocative turn. The source argues that these ancient power structures, they never really went away. They just got a rebrand. Just look at this side-by-side comparison laid out in the source. It draws a pretty direct line from ancient Rome to the modern US government. The Roman emperor who appointed the judges, or the theos, is put next to the president who appoints federal justices. The free bread handed out from Roman temples is compared to modern social security and other government benefits. It's making a structural argument about who holds the power and who people depend on. And to really hammer this point home, the source offers this really unique take on the title given to the Emperor Augustus Caesar, apothosis. They argue that it actually meant appointer of gods, as in the guy who had the power to choose the men who would act as the ruling judges, the gods many, across his entire empire. So where does all this lead? Well, it brings us to what the source presents as a fundamental choice, a choice between two totally different systems for how a society takes care of its people. On one side, you have what the source calls public religion, which is basically the state. The system is funded by mandatory taxes. It creates dependency through what it calls legal charity, and it's even described in the text with words like snare. Then, on the other side, there's pure religion. This is defined as voluntary, community-based support. It runs on free will offerings and is all about liberty and personal, social connections.
And to support this perspective on state welfare, the source pulls out this pretty powerful quote from the ancient historian Plutarch. It frames government benefits not as a form of help, but as a potential danger to liberty by making people dependent on their rulers. So this entire explainer, based on this source material, really reframes gods from these far-off beings into present-day powers. And it leaves us with one last, pretty challenging question. If gods are the ruling judges that we look to and depend on, who or what have we chosen as the ultimate authorities in our own lives? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for watching.